Elisa Veenbaas. I am the heart behind Sweet Peace Doula. I've been a doula now for 8 years, but I didn't launch my business until 2018 because up until that point, I felt really young. I did my first birth at 19, and so I wasn't ready to go full entrepreneur. Not gonna lie, I was like without a job at home. I had just graduated high school and I was like, woe is me. All my friends are at university. That just doesn't feel like the path for me. And so I was binge watching this show called Call the Midwife. And it was like 1940s fashion and romance, but it was also this journey of someone intimately going into people's homes, checking in on how they were and helping deliver their babies. And I remember having a conversation with my mom and being like, Mom, like, I want to do that. Like midwifery looked or birth work looked like this beautiful marriage between relational and medicine. And I'd been like sneaking nursing textbooks from when he had been in college and poring over them in high school. And so I knew I had this fascination for medicine or nursing, but it just wasn't the right puzzle piece. And so when I found doula work, it was like this instant like aha moment, because doula work is both the understanding of the human body and how labor and delivery works, but ultimately how a physical experience impacts our mental and emotional health and thereafter. Love one day to be a midwife, but I'm taking my slow time. Like I've clearly lived life. Like I've traveled, I've gotten married, I've had my own baby. And so I landed in Hawaii, and school there was one, really difficult to do homework on the weekends instead of going surfing at the beach. I'm not going to lie, but midwifery in the States is really different. And so I got to experience what you would consider like a home birth kind of window of education. But the program itself was really unique because the program director is an active working midwife. So she pulled colleagues in to teach us. So we were being taught by real nurses, real prenatal educators, doulas, midwives, and then we were doing hands-on practice. So everybody had to pick a role and like get in the birth tub and pretend to have a baby. And as hilarious as it was such a great way of like learning hands-on stuff, because birth work is so unique. Like you're not going to be able to figure it out just by reading a book. Like you got to kind of get into the mess of it. And so studying in Hawaii gave me ultimately the opportunity to go to the Philippines. And I knew at that point that, okay, yeah, birth work is definitely for me, but how am I going to follow that path? And an opportunity opened up to volunteer and put my new skills to practice. So while planning my wedding, I flew to the Philippines, and I got to be a student at a clinic where we had women coming and going every day. And the thing that I took away from the Philippines is quite simple, is that women are powerful. Birthing people are powerful because we had a very simple setup, just a small cart of like all of our tools. These birthing rooms were really small, and women would come, they would labor, we would deliver their babies. Maybe there would be a hospital transfer here and there, but it wasn't until I came back to Canada and did my first birth as a doula here in my home country that I had reverse culture shock. It wasn't there that I had culture shock. It was here because I came into a room full of like beeping machines and this big moving bed and all these gadgets. And I realized that like, at the end of the day, for the most part, birth is pretty normal and simple, and women are powerful. They're going to show up no matter how their birth goes. Yeah. But it's this unique juxtaposition that honestly in North America, we have something what I think parents are struggling with is decision fatigue. We have so many options. That's why I have a job. I have a job because navigating decision-making at the hospital or at a home birth and leading up to it and even postpartum, that's half of the battle is like, yeah, what do I want? Do I want an epidural? Do I not want an epidural? How am I going to feel in labor? Whereas in the Philippines, like the path was kind of laid out for you, but I'll never forget that experience. And being half Hispanic, I had many women just talk to me in the language thinking that I was from there. And so there was this really beautiful kind of like full circle working with other cultures, like that's a big part of who I am too. And so, yeah, definitely a trip of a lifetime for sure. I started this out and I had never had a baby. I had never even like been around a laboring person. And so I knew that I couldn't truly lament with a laboring woman, and I needed to be careful not to say like, "Oh, I know how you're feeling," because like no, I don't, but I'm here. But ultimately the way that my care has evolved is through the birth of my son. And it was a really pinnacle experience because as a doula, I went in with a lot of confidence. I went in doing, putting my money where my mouth was. I did all the things that I tell my clients to do. And I still ended up having a wild ride and an unexpected birth emergency. And so I kind of prided myself in the fact that I was unbiased. And then I experienced birth for myself. And I was like, oh no, you needed to be humbled. And so one of the ways that my practice has evolved is my goal for my client has ultimately changed. I used to be really passionate about birth outcome, and now the birthing person and their well-being, their experience, not how their birth goes, not if their birth plan is followed, not even like if they do A or B or C. My goal is to say, how are you doing along this journey? Because if we don't like focus in our care on the birthing person and their partner, we're lacking the biggest foundation to set them up to be good parents. And so the birth of my son led me to getting further education for both problem solving in the birth room because of the complications I experienced, but it ultimately changed my birth philosophy, which was quite the experience. And my midwife said something really powerful to me when I was processing that moment. And she said, Elisa, birth is beautiful because it's hard. It's not beautiful because you do it at home or you avoided a C-section or all of these things that society would say. Because once you get into the birth world, there are biases. There are people on either side of the fence. And she said, birth is beautiful because it's hard and because you endured. And so that's kind of my new philosophy. And my goals ultimately, I'm really passionate about working with people who have a pre-existing trauma or birth trauma, because I think we forget in our North American society that birth is both an emotional and spiritual experience. It's not just physical. And by neglecting that part and not really focusing in on mental health before we give birth and then after, we're seeing a rise in perinatal mental mood disorder. Like since COVID, numbers have gone from 1 to 6 to 1 in 3. And so my goals is to have a practice that is mental health focused first. And so how does that impact our prenatal sessions? How does that impact the way I treat you in the labor and delivering room? And so I don't know, like I love birth work and I love educating. And so my goals is to continue to be involved in my community, however that looks. And if that's taking on clients, doing one-on-one prenatal classes or birth coaching and healing, that's what I want to provide. Even though doula work is a solo kind of entrepreneurial experience, you can't do doula work without your community. And what I mean by that is like I had never experienced a laboring person and like had my first birth coming up. I had someone in my life who was expecting a baby say, you know what, why don't you come over to my house before I go to the hospital and you can kind of see what it's like. Not gonna lie, totally freaked me out. I was like, do I really want to do this? But I had people come alongside me along the way and point out different resources, because what's hard about doula work is we don't get the in like other health professionals do. But I would really encourage you to seek excess training outside of just a doula certification. That's a great like beginner step, but maybe even look into other like education to just grow in your knowledge, and then look at your community. Who do you have access to that could help you build a website? Who do you have access to that could get your name out there? Maybe your mom's aunt is a midwife. Give her your business cards, like resources in your community, like people that you know. That's how you're gonna figure out how to get your business off the ground. And so some of my first clients were because someone knew someone who then told them about me. Doula work is not for the faint of heart. Often people get into birth work because there is a sense of calling. And so that calling needs to be your drive. There's a reason why I keep coming back to this year after year, even if I haven't booked a client and I've just been posting here and there on social media. I care about what I do. It's a great job to come and go from, but like you gotta fight for it for sure. Cause it's hard. But when I started this 8 years ago and I told people, hey, I'm going to be a doula, they looked at me like I was helping somebody give birth in their backyard. And it was like all hippie and weird. And people were like, wait, are you a midwife? Like the amount of people had to just like give a definition to of what a doula was. Mm-hmm. It was in our culture quite yet. But 8 years later, here we are. And I tell people I'm a doula and they're like, oh, I was thinking of becoming a doula. So it's definitely like we're going on an uphill trajectory.